There's a moment in every empath's healing journey that looks like regression to everyone watching. The empath who once bent over backward to accommodate everyone, who smoothed over every conflict, who sacrificed their own needs to keep the peace, suddenly stops. They stop apologizing for things that aren't their fault. They stop contorting themselves to fit into spaces that were never meant for them. They stop performing emotional labor for people who never asked what they needed in return. And the people who benefited from the old version panic. They call the empath selfish. They say the empath has changed for the worse. They accuse the empath of no longer caring about anyone but themselves. But Carl Jung discovered something profound about this transformation. It wasn't the empath becoming selfish, it was the empath finally becoming whole. And that wholeness terrified people who had built their entire relationship with the empath on the foundation of the empath's self-abandonment. Today I'm going to show you what Jung observed about the final stage of healing, when empaths outgrow people-pleasing, why it looks like selfishness but is actually self-respect, and what happens when an empath finally stops asking permission to exist on their own terms. Jung spent decades studying what he called the individuation process, the journey toward psychological completeness. What he found was that empaths who never outgrow people-pleasing remain trapped in a developmental stage that slowly destroys them from the inside out. They achieve surface-level healing. They understand their patterns intellectually. They can articulate what they never make the final leap into actually living as if their needs matter as much as everyone else's. Jung observed something specific in his practice that revealed the depth of this trap. His empathic patients would make tremendous progress. They'd recognize their wounds, understand their triggers, develop self-awareness. But then they'd walk into a family dinner, and within minutes they'd be right back in the old pattern, apologizing for stating a preference, downplaying their achievements so others wouldn't feel threatened, laughing off disrespect to keep the mood light. Jung realized these empaths had healed their understanding, but not their nervous system. Intellectually, they knew they deserved respect. Emotionally, they were still operating from the childhood programming that taught them their worth was determined by how well they served others' comfort. The final stage of healing happens when these two realities finally align, when what the empath knows in their mind becomes what they feel in their body, when the understanding that they deserve respect translates into the willingness to walk away from anyone who doesn't provide it. But here's what makes this stage so difficult and so misunderstood. Outgrowing people-pleasing doesn't happen through more self-awareness or more therapy or more boundary-setting practice. It happens through exhaustion, complete bone-deep soul-level exhaustion, with playing a role that was never sustainable. Jung found that empaths reach a breaking point where the cost of people-pleasing finally exceeds the fear of disappointing others, where the pain of self-abandonment becomes more unbearable than the discomfort of someone being upset with them, where they realize with devastating clarity that they've been setting themselves on fire to keep people warm who wouldn't offer them a blanket if they were freezing. This breaking point is different for everyone. For some, it's a single catastrophic betrayal. For others, it's the accumulation of 1,000 small moments where they shrunk themselves and no one even noticed. But what emerges on the other side is someone fundamentally transformed. The empath who has outgrown people-pleasing stops asking if it's okay to have needs. They stop couching every request in apologetic language. They stop performing gratitude for the bare minimum. They've realized that people who require you to diminish yourself aren't offering connection. They're demanding submission. Jung called this stage the reclamation of authentic selfhood. The empath has stopped outsourcing their sense of worth to other people's approval. They've stopped using others' comfort as the metric for their own success. They've stopped believing that being liked is more important than being respected. What makes this transformation look like selfishness to observers is its completeness. The healed empath doesn't have occasional moments of assertiveness, followed by guilty backpedaling. They've developed what Jung described as unshakable internal authority. They know what they want, they know what they need, and they're no longer willing to negotiate those things away to maintain relationships that require their smallness. This shows up in specific observable ways that Jung documented carefully. The healed empath stops over-explaining their decisions, not out of rudeness, but because they've realized that people who respect you don't require a dissertation to justify your choices. They've learned that the more you explain yourself to people who are determined to misunderstand you, the more ammunition you give them to argue. They stop saying yes when they mean no. Not sometimes, not in low-stakes situations, never. They've recognized that every yes that should have been a no is a betrayal of themselves, a message to their own psyche that their truth doesn't matter. They've decided that disappointing others is acceptable, but disappointing themselves is not. They stop participating in relationships that require them to perform a version of themselves that doesn't exist, not because they're being authentic in some performative way, but because they've become allergic to the exhaustion of pretending. They'd rather be alone than be with people who only like the mask. Jung observed that this transformation terrifies the people who benefited from the empath's people-pleasing. Family members who relied on the empath to absorb all the dysfunction suddenly have to face their own issues. Friends who took without giving suddenly lose their emotional support system. Partners who are comfortable with an accommodating empath suddenly encounter someone with non-negotiable standards. These people typically respond with what Jung called systemic resistance. They'll tell the empath they've become difficult, demanding, high maintenance. They'll reminisce about how much easier the empath used to be, how much more fun they were before all this healing work. They'll suggest the empath is being influenced by therapy, by new friends, by self-help content that's making them entitled. But Jung would tell you that this resistance is the clearest evidence you're doing something right. People don't mourn the loss of your people-pleasing unless they were benefiting from it. Their nostalgia for the old you is nostalgia for a dynamic where their needs were centered and yours were invisible. What happens during this final stage is that the empath stops making other people's emotional reactions their responsibility to manage. This sounds simple, but it represents a complete rewiring of the empathic operating system. Before outgrowing people-pleasing, the empath's internal state is held hostage by others' responses. Someone is disappointed, and the empath immediately feels like they failed. Someone is upset, and the empath rushes to fix it. Someone withdraws approval, and the empath scrambles to regain it. After outgrowing people-pleasing, the empath develops what Jung called emotional sovereignty. They can witness someone's disappointment without feeling compelled to resolve it. They can let someone be upset without making it their emergency. They can lose someone's approval and remain completely unmoved because they've stopped seeking validation from people who use it as a control mechanism. Jung noticed that healed empaths develop an almost startling ability to tolerate other people's discomfort. They can say no and sit calmly in the silence that follows. They can state a boundary and not rush to soften it when someone looks hurt. They can walk away from a relationship and not circle back to check if the person has realized their worth yet. This capacity to tolerate others' discomfort without fixing it is what Jung considered the hallmark of true psychological maturity. It means the empath has finally internalized that other people's feelings are not their responsibility to manage, that someone being upset doesn't mean the empath did something wrong, that disappointing people who have unreasonable expectations is not a moral failure. If you're an empath outgrowing people-pleasing, you're probably experiencing something that feels simultaneously liberating and terrifying. You're watching relationships you bent yourself into pretzels for fall away because they can't survive your refusal to play small anymore. You're losing people who claim to love you, but apparently only loved what you did for them. You're being called selfish by people who never once asked what you needed. And you might be wondering if you've gone too far, if you've overcorrected, if you've become the kind of person who doesn't care about anyone but themselves. Jung would tell you that what you're experiencing is exactly right. You haven't become selfish, you've stopped being selfless. And there's a universe of difference between those two things. Selflessness is self-erasure. It's the belief that your needs don't matter, that your worth comes from how much you give, that love means sacrificing yourself on the altar of everyone else's comfort. Selflessness is a trauma response masquerading as virtue. Self-respect is knowing that you matter too, that your needs are as valid as anyone else's. That love should never require you to abandon yourself. Self-respect is psychological health, finally expressing itself after years of suppression. The final stage of healing completes when you realize you don't need permission to prioritize yourself. You don't need approval to set boundaries. You don't need validation to walk away from people who diminish you. You've become the authority on your own life, and that changes everything. Jung found that empaths who complete this final stage don't just heal from people-pleasing. They become fundamentally different people. They don't attract the same dynamics because they're no longer broadcasting the same wounded energy. They don't tolerate disrespect because they've learned that tolerating it once teaches people they can do it again. You're not selfish, you're self-aware. You're not difficult, you're discerning, you're not too much. You're finally, after all this time, enough exactly as you are. And Jung would tell you that this self-acceptance isn't the end of your empathy. It's the beginning of using it wisely. Welcome to the last stage of healing. Welcome to the life where you stop asking permission to take up space